Hey, all right. Welcome, everybody. Property Committee, January 24, 2013, 2023. And we are pleased to have a third member again. Welcoming John Culpepper, new to the committee, new to the commission. And I don't think we have any changes to the agenda, do we, Josh? And I'm looking for an approval of the minutes, Patrick, from our December 12th meeting.
So moved to approve the December 21st, was it 21st?
Yeah, 12th.
December 12th, excuse me, the next year. We're gonna read minutes.
You mind, is it okay with you to second them even though you weren't here?
Second.
Okay, and all in favor of the minutes as they are?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, those are approved. And I'll hand it over to staff to walk us through where we are today.
Yes, so Property Committee, we're glad to be back, and Central Services staff is taking y'all's feedback from the December 12th meeting. And we provided, Cynthia emailed you a copy ingratiating of the changes they made, and Gavin, Angel, and Beth are going to walk us through those, and we can go back and forth, and any questions y'all have about why those changes were made, we can talk through. But we expect that conversation will take about a half an hour, then we'll have a half an hour for the facility space allocation.
And remind me, because some of this is standard stuff that's in there. So some of that stuff, John, when we first did this, we were learning what has to be in there, what is modified, what's personalized, what's us specific versus mandated. So if anything, whatever catches your eye, it's good to have fresh pair of eyes on this as well. Patrick, for me and you, it kind of feels fresh.
Yeah.
It's so long ago. But first of all, the difference in the gray box is what's changed since the last time we saw it. And the yellow highlights, tell me what that is.
So the yellow highlights, Commissioner, are some of those required things that finance will have to change based on the actual timeline that we eventually get to. So once this is posted, some of the dates that are highlighted in yellow will be changed by finance to correspond with required timelines. Same with some of the numbers, like the RFP number and other things. The yellow is essentially going to be changed by finance.
So the yellow is what the date was last time.
Yeah.
And so once it comes out of our committee as being no longer a draft, but ready to send to finance, then the dates start rolling in from there.
Correct.
Right? And then there's also for the, I think in here, yeah, okay. So that helps with that for me and you as well. Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, to follow up on that, Commissioner, for the sake of everyone, we do start with a typical, 20-page boiler template is what they call it from Finance Department. And that includes a lot of your legal language as well as policy language from our Finance Department, also standard procurement language. So that is essentially the template we start with. Then what we did a couple months ago, the first round, was essentially attempt this RFP and released it. And we used that same RFP for the most part to draft now this second version. And so we've made those gray highlights at the request of the committee to change it from the first version that was essentially not required or not recommended to go forward. And we've made those changes in gray. But that's kind of the basis for the template that you have in front of you. It starts with finance. It's one that we used last time, and now we've made additional changes to it, which are highlighted in gray.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So is there a certain number of changes that if you make a certain number of changes, you have to redo the RFP versus negotiating with the group that proposed?
There's not a set number per se, Commissioner. Essentially, once the RFP is posted, there's really no changes that take place after that posting for a matter of fairness. Now, once you get to a select number of respondents, you certainly have that ability to negotiate with them if you choose to keep going forward with that bidder. But that's nothing that necessarily changes the RFP per se. Those are just additional negotiations after everybody has responded to the RFP. What the committee decided to do last time was not recommend going forward with the bidder that responded to the original RFP. And so it wasn't a matter of just changing the RFP. It was start over, let's redo this and change the RFP at the same time. Yeah.
And so, County Attorney Judge Rake's not here. He's gonna be here. He's running late because he's in a meeting. But his recommendation, based on how the committee voted, was that we would have to do a new RFP. And so the mayor then assigned back to the committee the request to do another RFP.
Yeah.
Right, and part of that discussion also was, as a committee, we talked about, it's like, we probably had more details we could have put in there
Right.
so that we had details to discuss in that manner. And so we voted to, not go for, no action,
Yeah.
so that we could learn more.
Right.
But the mayor felt like staff knows enough that we didn't need to study more, but yet to talk about what would make a better RFP with more details so that we had those answers.
So just to go back even to the minutes that we just approved, based on the feedback from the committee at the last meeting, specifically, we looked at clarification about the use of the kitchen, use of the first floor space, use of outbuildings, general maintenance, alterations to the inside, landscaping, parking, subleasing, community access. Those are all things that essentially the gray area should now address in some form or fashion. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to sort of skip some pages. Certainly let me know if you have any questions, but a lot of these pages either weren't changed or are standard language, or maybe we changed a spelling error that we found on something. So I'm going to kind of highlight the areas where we really made some substance changes. Right. So starting on page 6 of the RFP, essentially what we did is we kept the first lease end date of June 30th, 2024. So again, depending on when this is posted, when a bidder could potentially be approved or recommended, we would enter into a lease contract, let's just anticipate sometime in 2023, but that first lease would still end on the June 30th, 2024 for its first year. Now, we would typically have automatic renewals as part of any lease for a total of up to 5 years, if that's the way we choose to go. But that was the date based on some of the way that this has gone with schedule-wise.
Patrick?
So all, just for clarity, all this is due on the 30th for
Yes.
all, okay.
Yes.
That's part of the synchronizing that we're doing with all of our,
Yeah, what we're trying to do is, even though this is going to potentially be posted and maybe even approved mid-year, we'd still like it to end in line with the rest of our leases so that we can get that scheduled for that.
So the goal is to have it approved mid-year of 2023, so they'll have over a year under the lease. Okay.
Okay. The only other real change that we did towards the bottom of the page is we made the RFP good for 120 days from when we receive and close the deadline for respondents. So that gives you as a committee a little bit more time to review them, to grade them, to make a recommendation to the mayor and commission. Otherwise, the previous version was 90 days. And so within 3 months, essentially, that gives the respondent the ability to back out with no penalty and not honor their agreement if it goes past 90 days. So we've extended that to 120 days.
because we did feel a little time, that was another, we felt like, there isn't enough time for us to nail down that little list that you went through. So,
Okay.
is everybody okay with the 120?
Okay. Page 8, please. So on page 8, what we did is we added in gray the part about sole entities. And after talking with Sherry, I believe, it becomes a little easier for us to negotiate and to go into a contract with a sole entity as opposed to, say, a 50% partnership where one partner is potentially a for-profit and the other one is a nonprofit, and then how that works with the lease policy and CBAs and finalizing the actual rate and terms, it gets a little muddy. So what we're suggesting is that whoever the actual applicant is, that it is essentially someone who is 100% able to make decisions and is a sole entity for that purpose.
Is that consistent with our other leases on our other property, that they're all sole entities?
I would say yes, that, yeah, all of our other nonprofits, for example, they are a 100% nonprofit sole entity, yeah.
And we have one building, if I recall, that of our building that has two separate tenants in it. So there's that, but each of them have their own
Yes.
details of responsibility.
So what we were
Diversion Center,
suggesting,
right?
yeah, well, and even the Miriam Moore Center, I believe, in East Athens, there are multiple tenant spaces that we lease. But as you said, each tenant, essentially each agreement needs to be with a sole entity.
And we could have two leases potentially.
Yeah,
With two entities in Taylor Grady, but we don't want to see that sublease.
Right, it would be spelled out
correct.
in those terms.
All right, on page 9, we sort of addressed a little bit more stringently the noise prohibition for the first 6 months of any occupancy, that respecting the other occupant on the property, the town and gown, for the first 6 months, whoever schedules events in the Taylor Grady needs to do so where there's no amplification of music that coincides with the date of the town and gown.
So this is where I put a question mark. So if the town and gown is not having an event in the first 6 months, you pretty much, this is saying it's okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And then we'll continue to have their schedule number. We had a list,
Yep.
I think 4 years out, probably three years out now, of their performances, because that was the arrangement and the dialogue that happened with the previous tenant.
Yeah.
And so this is helping us make sure the new tenant and our current tenant on the same property, which again are their own two entities, but they still have to do a lot of collaborating and neighborly decisions on parking and the sound.
So is there a day of the week that the town and gown always has their events?
They tend to have them pretty regularly, and we have received essentially their 4-year outlook. This isn't to say that they can't have events scheduled at the same time, but we expect them, and there are already clauses in the lease that say they have to essentially work together, even if they have an event at the same time and the same day, that they need to, play along together. But at least for the first 6 months, in respect for town and gown, with a new tenant coming on board, if they happen to have an event on the same day for the first 6 months, Taylor Grady would be prohibited from at least playing music out of fairness. After that, I think that, amplified music, that would at least give them 6 months to kind of get to know each other and figure things out a little bit.
And make sure that dialogue between new tenant and event participants understand.
Yeah.
And a little practice time
Yes.
on that, but yeah.
And Attorney Sherry Hines had recommended the 6-month period. I think we had thought about just requiring it, but then we realized, well, that's pretty much every weekend. A lot of them fall on weekends, and that's prime rentals for Taylor Grady, obviously. So we didn't want to limit it forever, but we wanted to encourage a period of collaboration.
And by having this added in here, it helps identify the additional paperwork you guys, I think, have for that shared parking. We are both tenants under the same landlord, even though. Okay.
Okay. Going to page 11 now. This is kind of where we get into a good number of changes, and we'll just briefly kind of go over them. On page 11, we start to really make it clear that there is no commercial kitchen that exists on the property, and one is not allowed. Essentially, even if your plan is to pay for the improvements yourself, I think the committee basically said, listen, we're not going to go down that road, that the kitchen is what it is. right now, and it's not a commercial kitchen. I put two paragraphs, the first two bullet points under number 2, because I don't think there was a clear decision as to where we were going to go as a committee on the first floor, essentially the basement level. So the 2 bullet points, one of them is going to go, depending on which direction you want. But the first one sort of indicates they can have the first floor basement as part of the overall rental. The second bullet point says, no, we are going to hold off and maintain that for Athens-Clarke County purposes. So that's one thing that the committee does need to decide before we go forward with posting the RFP.
Madam Chair, have you updated Commissioner Culpepper about ACC space needs and concerns?
Well, I had told him that that was one of the things we wanted to study, but the mayor thought we could move forward and learn as well, but yet we do still have it on our agenda, ACC Gov facility space allocation. So, I think we're still juggling the 2 topics because they are relevant, but how we want to work through that with the description of the space is where we need to help with.
So legally, once we do the RFP, it's out there. So like, can we say we could possibly need basement in the future, or it may be accessible?
I think it would be cleaner for us to make sure we know what we're doing before we post the RFP, that if there is a chance that we might want it, we may just say it's off limits to begin with, and that even if we change our mind 3 years from now, that's fine. But if there's any inclination that we might want it for our own purposes, I think we need to state that up front before we post them.
And that would be bullet number 2.
Yeah. But, yes, sir.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm new, so I'm trying to make sure I'm up to speed. Do we know the square footage of the first floor or basement?
We could break it down. The entire building is roughly 13,000 square feet, and it's all,
So it's
basically.
evenly spaced between all 3 and 4. Okay, so each.
Yeah, about 4,000 square feet,
Okay.
100%.
And we did study the cost that it would be to upfit the basement, to put staff in there.
Mhm.
That, you remember what that was? If you haven't started.
I want to say it exceeded $250,000.
Yeah.
Yes. Because at that point, it's important to remember that that basement is not retrofitted currently for commercial office use, which is what it would have to be if a tenant such as Athens-Clarke County was going to go into it. It would have to be retrofitted to meet our current code for building purposes, and it doesn't meet.
It had in more than one way, old grandfathered in stuff. So bullet number 2, as we're brainstorming this, would be that the tenant, whoever's looking at this RFP doesn't have dream space envisioned for the first floor, because we may need it. And if we needed it for staff, we would have a whole nother spinoff that would address that. And if we did fix it up for our staff needs, 3 years from now, it's fixed up and we don't need it, then we would basically do another RFP for somebody that might want to use that space in its 2 code version.
That's correct.
Is that right?
Yes.
What do you guys think? What do you think? What do you want? Okay, first of all, do we want to go through the whole thing and then come back to?
Yeah.
Are they independent of themselves so that we can continue to look at details?
Yeah, let's go through this, and I think, again, I'm not gonna make a decision for the committee, but even if the committee chooses to take action maybe on this entire request after the presentation on space allocation, I don't know if there's a reason why you can't come back to actual vote on your recommendation for this after.
Yeah, after the second agenda.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right,
Okay.
well, let's keep marching
All right.
through so we have time for that.
We also beefed up on page 11, the off-site parking, the requirement for an MOU or an agreement. We talked about use of the elevator or the lift, I'm sorry. That they can use the outbuildings that are on site, however, they cannot modify the 2 outbuildings. Essentially, you can use them for storage. They're non-habitable buildings. And then we also talked about any interior building modifications and the limited nature of those. Yes, sir.
Just want to make sure, I missed this, please forgive me, but no parking on that road. I keep forgetting the name of that road.
Grady.
Grady, yeah.
Well, what we've done in there is, if it's not in that specific sentence, it's later on in the RFP where we basically said they have to provide a transportation plan, and that the plan does not show on-street parking, essentially, that they need to come up with some other alternative other than parking in the neighborhood.
Yeah, and knowing good and well that somebody can come to an event and end up parking on the
Yeah.
street, but it's a minority of what might happen to be somebody that misses
It's
the memo, but the
incidental.
bulk of the
Yeah.
traffic, whether it's the setup, the tenant, the visitors.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's on.
which page? Is it still on 11?
Okay. In no case may street parking be designed, designated for operational needs. What about just for event needs? I don't know, Judd, do we have to specify the name of the street? Or does it bend that broad?
In the RFP,
Yes.
you're saying you don't want parking on certain streets. I think it'd be good for the applicant to know that. Potentially interested to know that.
Could we do it broad enough as neighborhood neighborhood streets?
Well, I mean, right now it says no street parking.
There's no on-street parking.
Correct. Now, again, aside from the incidental, like random person who doesn't know any better and accidentally parks there, their event planning for parking as part of their proposal should indicate that if we have an event over 25 parking spaces, which are on site or something, we're either going to use a neighboring property, we're going to shuttle people in, or they're supposed to come up with a plan as part of their proposal, but that part of the plan should not indicate on-street parking. That's what the RFP language
The
indicates.
reason, I mean, one of the challenges of this property that we have, and this, being used for an event facility is pretty regular complaints about noise, especially from the amplified sound outside, and then complaints about, on-street parking from events. That's been a constant stat, and I've had to deal with it too. I don't know how to percolate up big good. Am I correct? That's what this is.
That's correct.
So that's one of the challenges of this site.
With 2 lanes.
It's great for,
And that's another reason.
it's great for, weddings. But the challenge is the neighbors around it don't really like it that much. They just violins, really liked, harps instead of,
Like a boy wedding.
yeah, it does. I mean, that's the challenge is they want the DJ or the loud band, and just know that's the challenge. And I know because Sherry shared with me that in the last application, which y'all, the applicant basically said, well, noise control is your problem. We can't have that, y'all. I wanted to speak to that. He said, you need to plant planes. I'm not gonna worry about that. That is a problem. You follow what I'm saying? We can't do that.
Yeah.
Y'all know that's a non-starter.
Right, well, and
I wasn't sure she knew about the problems I had dealt with because I had central services with, Andrew when that was the first year I was here. We were constantly getting complaints about that.
Right, and from Legislative Review Committee, we were studying our noise ordinance. And our very property was up there in the high ranking complaint column. And then, we were talking about what to do about the landlord. I'm like, guys, we're talking about us here. So it's our chance to make it to where, as landlords, we're better neighbors by adding these details.
Which is a challenge, because I know that's gonna be a challenge for the operator, because they're gonna have, I guess if they understand going in, this is what you're accepting, because, I know, the response, the submission last time was, I need you, Athens-Clarke, to take care of this noise issue. That's not, I guess,
Well, and that's why we're redoing this because I felt like as a committee that we weren't, for doing this for the first time, I thought we were really detailed. And then Patrick and I were like, oh boy, we got to add more details for that to be clear. So I guess on that point, do you think this detail is clear enough there? I do. In no case may street parking be designated for operational needs. So there's got to be an explanation for there.
Yeah. Okay.
And then we'll assess
Yeah.
the explanation. I mean, that's almost 3 sentences added to what was on there before in that explanation.
Okay.
Are we gonna go through everything? Because I've got a question about the outbuilding. Do you want me to wait and ask that at the end?
No, go ahead and ask.
What would y'all prefer?
I say, go for it.
So they're uninhabitable now.
Mhm.
I've got a copy of the proposal that was sent, and they were talking about renovating it.
Mhm.
And then we talked about not having a kitchen.
Mhm.
Would it be possible for that, because that's a detached building. I think the issue with the kitchen is it's attached to the building fire issue. If you have a detached building, would that be, or is there possible uses for the outbuildings?
At least from what we heard from the committee last time, was that the buildings can be used by the tenant, whether it's something somebody walks in just to see what it looked like, or if it's used for storage, that's fine. But I think based on even potentially the proposal that was received and the improvements that were planned, there was a hesitation with allowing those historic structures to be modified in that way. And I think for a number of reasons. One, there was a cost consideration, at least that it wasn't necessarily going to be borne 100% by the applicant at that time. But also the modifications again to the historic building itself are not just always kept on the interior. Even with a commercial kitchen, all of a sudden you've got a requirement for a hood that needs to be exhausted out the side. And so how does that affect the aesthetics of the building and its historic nature? I think too, with a commercial kitchen, what we've run into and questions that were raised is at some point in time, Athens-Clarke County may be on the hook for maintenance and repair of that commercial kitchen.
And wasn't there also potential code, back to the code, details of the first floor?
Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Once that changed from being storage.
Yeah. And I'll say to having been in each of those outbuildings to convert those to a kitchen, perhaps, significant renovation, to do that.
Because they don't even have power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, even the flooring in those is wood, if not dirt in some.
And we also didn't want it to become the DJ hut. Because then that makes the noise louder
Yeah.
toward the,
Yes.
any more, are we ready for number 3?
Okay. Well, what I was going to do is go to number 12, then page 12.
Okay.
And that's kind of where we beefed up language on pest control responsibility, as well as ADA compliance. That landscaping by the applicant is off limits in any form or fashion. Essentially, we're going to continue to maintain the landscape, and it's the landscape that we choose as a government to have in place. We talked about the preference for a community benefits agreement. We indicated after our calls and how those will be handled. And then we also brought up appliance maintenance and any use of or expectation regarding ACC staff labor. So, moving furnishings and things like that, that's not something that we do. So.
And some of this also are details in other leases that we hadn't had.
That's correct.
Patrick?
So this is one of the things we brought up last time. Like, we're having a wedding. I'm hosting a wedding at Taylor Grady. ACC just cut 2 weeks ago, and they're not scheduled to cut 1 week in a week in rain. And rain, so the grass is overgrown. It was not specified, so it is specified. Tenants are not any outdoor landscape. But, if I'm doing a wedding, I'm having people outside, is there a mechanism that I come to central services and say?
I think they can always, reach out to us and say, listen, it's overgrown a little bit, or we'd really like it if you could consider cutting on a Friday instead of next Monday. We'll try to accommodate those requests as best we can. I can't promise that we'll always be able to meet that. But I think the concern we heard last time was that at the point we start letting them hire, even at their own expense, other companies,
That's a no.
we don't know if what they're doing to the grounds. You know, they may all of a sudden be trimming the bushes when they're not supposed to be trimmed, and they may cut the grass too low to where all of a sudden now we've got brown spots and it's dying.
More than a third, you can't cut more than a third of the height.
Yeah.
But kill it.
There should be, I mean, to Patrick's point, if you're renting out for a wedding, there needs to be something in there that we're gonna make sure the grounds are presentable. Because if it's not on the cut cycle or whatever it is, and the grass is overgrown, you know, yes, it's our property, we're not letting them touch it, but it's also affecting the aesthetics of the facility if the grass is overgrown. So there, I don't know what the answer is, but I feel like there needs to be something in there.
I mean, Commissioner, I think what we could offer is we maintain a 7 to 10 day cycle at this facility in terms of mowing. We aim to be out there every 7 to 10 days.
And we have areas of the community, 6 weeks.
Correct. Yeah. So this being a government
this is-
facility, we do get out there every 7 to 10 days, and we commit to that. And that's all at our expense. That's not forwarded on to the applicant at all. I think where we would get in a bit of confusion is we've been maintaining it every week, but all of a sudden it happens to be the 5th day of the rotation and they have a wedding, and in their opinion, the grass needs to look like a golf course that weekend, even though it's realistically not that high. I think I think we will get into a debate quite often with.
You get too deep in the weeds.
Yeah, exactly. But to your point, you know, because this is an ACC Gov facility, it's on the same cycle as this facility and any other government facility in terms of being cut in terms of grass. So if the grass gets to the point where it is aesthetically unpleasing, well, then that's on us, naturally, that we're not maintaining the cycle that we need.
And then that's where the communications is. We're not trying to drop the communications. But did the committee feel that the actual 7 to 10 day grass cutting commitment should be included in here too? Or did I miss that? It is. I mean, do we need to, we don't need to like codify that.
I would prefer not to, just because we never, like, you know, if it rains for 3 straight days, and that was one of those days that we were gonna be out there to cut, you know, it'll jump to the top of the list on the next dry day, but if it's all of a sudden the 11th day instead of the 10th, what's the ramifications of us not being on our end
It's
of
still
it?
raining. Yeah,
Correct.
understood. Okay.
Page 13, I was gonna jump to next.
Okay.
This is where we talked about indicating in their proposal a certain percentage or a number of public events that they expect to have annually. I know that was something that we wanted clarification on, is how that public outreach is being conducted and to what degree. And then we also, in a separate paragraph, specified a little bit more clearly that there is no subleasing of the space. So.
Right. I like the way you've made it, number or percentage.
Yeah. And I mean, we didn't even state a set goal per se, you know, that you have to have 25% or you have to have 50%. I think that's still up to the decision of the committee. But at least you have to, as a proposal, call it out what you expect to.
Right. Okay.
Quite honestly, there are some other additional gray areas going forward, but those are all either repeats of the first section we went over, or things that we didn't think were needing explanation, but I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Well, for the sake of time, guys, if committee, if you're ready for us to go to the facility space allocation information you guys want to share with us, and then that's going to help us with the decision point on the other page.
Yeah.
Yes,
Is that okay with committee?
Absolutely.
Then that gets us back to page 11 where we have
Yes.
choices. Okay.
right, so just to kick this off, this is also scheduled to be an item on your retreat Friday morning, so we're spending 3 hours with y'all Friday morning, and we're gonna talk a little bit about this, and we'd love for the property committee and the chair to speak to y'all's intent with this. On
Just
Friday.
3 hours?
So
more?
this is only a 10-minute, this is a 10 to 15-minute presentation. We're spending 3 hours with y'all. Y'all have other plans in the
Well, I'm so
afternoon.
glad this is getting integrated into our talk.
So we're gonna integrate this, and we
Okay,
hope y'all speak to kind of your thoughts on
Right.
that. What I wanted to share though is how we got here. And so Chair has asked us to think about the broader context, and so we're excited to do that with y'all as the property committee. Where this started was with the Costa conversation. So a couple doors down, we've got the Costa building, and we've gutted it. However, the cost to actually make the improvements that Mayor and Commission approved were at least $2 million over budget. And so what we've done as staff is, based on the last retreat and the feedback y'all gave, we created an updated bid, RFP for the Costa building. And that's gonna go live on February 2nd. And so the bids are gonna be due on March 15th. So following that, and we're being as quick as we can here, there's gonna be a mayor and commission vote on April 4th.
What?
And so y'all will have the opportunity to vote on some options. We don't know what the bids are gonna be. They might come back over budget again. So all that to say, what I'm trying to give y'all is a timeline of
Yeah.
when we might need an RFP done for tenants for Costa, right?
She's
So
a
he-
Pete.
Say those dates again.
So February 2nd, we're gonna put the RFP out, and then we're gonna get bids back in mid-March, March 15th. So then we turn that around an agenda item for y'all. And even if y'all say, if it's under budget and you say, go build it, it's gonna take a year from then to build it. So we're talking May 2024, Costa's done at the earliest. Now, there could be a different chain of events if we don't get a good bid back. If y'all want to redesign it to make it cheaper and we put it back out again, right? That could happen, but so with all that, we've got some time as the property committee because your second charge from the mayor was to develop an RFP for tenants for the Costa building.
Yeah, so the RFP you're talking about right now is finishing out the
Yeah,
livability of the Costa building. I was gonna
Yeah.
say, but when it comes to the RFP for the tenants, that's what our team is here.
that's what your team's tasked with, but you have some time.
We got lots of time on that one.
Because,
Okay.
yeah, you've
February
got,
2nd?
That's for finishing the building.
so it'd be.
The state.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to give you all that time frame. So you have a few meetings to really think about what our space needs are before we have to start with SPLOST and really defining the RFP for tenants for the Costa.
Yeah.
So that's really your go-do as a committee, is to develop that RFP. But we've got at least 6 months to kind of see how the actual Costa building plays out. So just wanted to do that.
Okay, excellent.
Does that make?
Sorry. Sounds like we're putting the cart before the horse. We're putting the bid out to finish it when we don't know what we're gonna use it for.
Well, there's a lot of ideas, yeah, of
It's
how
a
to use it.
shell of a finish.
Yeah.
So how do you recommend how to finish it if we don't know what the use is going to be?
Maybe what we do is take you on a tour.
Yeah.
And so there are some potential uses. I think that there's been so many ideas in the community of how to use it that the mayor wanted to assign it to the committee to create an RFP to receive applications from the community. I think what we would do, there's no funding in the actual project to retrofit it to any tenant. So even if we were to move our employees in there, we'd have to find the money to actually build out.
Or divide,
Yeah.
or furnish, or,
So all the finishings, we don't have money for that. What we're looking at is just actually the building, the stairs in the back, new elevators, a rooftop patio was in the design.
the add-on on the back that was supposed to get the elevator chute.
That's right.
So getting it to code, getting it to current code
Yep.
is what is previously came in 2 million over.
Yeah, and we can share more about that with you, Commissioner, as we get closer to April, kind of catch you up on that and set up a tour with our.
And then we're gonna get more, we're gonna be going into this again too, Friday morning.
Yeah.
You'll get around to.
So what's the square footage on this building? Is that on another slide?
The Costa, yes, it will be on another slide. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But all that to just introduce the topic of, The property committee wanted to look at all of our buildings and get a better sense of what our need is. Because if we go into an RFP process for tenants of Costa and we don't have space for our own employees, that's kind of on us. So we really want to understand that before we go through that process.
And to build off what Josh said, so whether it's Taylor Grady, whether it's Costa, whether it's any ACC Go facility
Fire hall,
that we
yeah,
own,
Publix.
correct. It's all part of a larger discussion about our space needs as a government and to provide for both our staff and the services that we provide to the community. So this is a very, very high level brief on space allocation in general. Where we're at and some of the background is we're approaching, the 1,750 mark, I think roughly on employees, whether that's full-time, part-time, things like that. We obviously have to have space for all of these individuals. So as the government grows, so does our space needs. A lot of this, at least in the last couple of years, was predicated on a new judicial center that would then free up the courthouse for renovation to fit new departments. That is still ongoing and is also a couple years out, perhaps more so than what we anticipated. And so we're sort of running up against a wall at this point where we thought we would have a clearer picture as to how we could retrofit the courthouse and who would be able to move there and who's going into the judicial center. And in return, what we were doing is we were delaying or deferring improvements to some of our existing buildings that we thought we would be able to surplus because we would no longer need them. That is not necessarily the case. And we're coming to this point now where those buildings are in need of desperate attention, and it doesn't look like we're going to be selling them anytime soon. So decisions will have to be made in the coming years. As an example, Doherty Street, the planning department building inspections. Major renovations within the next 2 years are surpassing $900,000 if we were to go that route. But again, that is a building that was actually part of the redevelopment of Bethel Homes. So it's not one that we anticipated hanging on to. Same with Satula. A lot of the functions in Satula were going to move to the courthouse, or at least that was anticipated. In the next 2 years, there's over $750,000 planned in renovations for Satula. And this, when I say renovations, it's not even renovations. It's HVAC, roofs, maintenance things. Yes. So that's a little background. Other things to consider in this discussion. Staffing. Our staff that spend their 8 hours a day, some even more than that, in each one of these facilities, it directly contributes to our retention of staff, and our attrition, the work environment that we're providing for individuals. There's also a direct link, as I just mentioned, between space needs and life cycle planning. Where we choose to put our space, put our employees, have our services provided, that has a direct impact on life cycle of roofs, HVAC. And so as we make these decisions about future allocations and where those space needs are, it will have a ripple effect on the life cycle planning for other facilities. And then our citizens and community. There's a public perception, obviously, with our facilities and how we use the space, the location of those spaces. Are they convenient? The aesthetics? And is it the most efficient and effective use of our funds? The current budget. There is a space allocation budget. It is a capital item that was originally funded, I believe, 5 years ago with about $300,000. It hasn't really been supplemented since then. It was meant to help us buy time in anticipation of the courthouse. Those funds have now dwindled. And there's less than half of that remaining at this point in
So
time.
it's $300,000 in it?
That there was 5 years ago, yes. Yeah. And that was specifically for improvements to existing buildings to make more offices, to change conference room space, things like that, to buy us time. That is the only budget that we have, essentially. There was a study done in 2018 of a number of departments that were anticipated to go to the courthouse. It was not a comprehensive Athens-Clarke County entirety study. It did not hit every department. That is now out of date. It was never implemented because obviously the courthouse is not at that point yet.
And our departments, those numbers have changed too, as well as new categories. And that's the other thing too is, which departments work to get, need to be close to each other versus could be separated.
That's correct. So as part of that study on the right-hand side, you'll see some of the needs that were identified by some departments. Some departments didn't exist or weren't included in that study. But that was from 5 years ago. As you just indicated, those numbers are 5 years old already. The other thing to consider in overall talks is more than likely anything we do between now and the courthouse is a Band-Aid, is a temporary solution until we find a permanent fix. And as an example, the last added space that we actually built as a government was fire number 2 in the co-op extension on Atlanta Highway. That added 21,250 square feet to our overall space, but that was a number of years ago.
So now we have old number 2 that's being
Retrofitted,
yes.
yes.
They're like $150,000 to make that TPW staff.
That's correct.
And then
Number 2 is out there, my Publix.
the
Yes.
old one.
Yes, the old one that hasn't been used in years since the new one was built.
Academy Sports.
We are actually
Mhm.
about to initiate a renovation of
Is
that.
the new one in Cleveland Road?
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay.
And again, that is a temporary fix because at some point in time, that fire station is anticipated to go away with an intersection realignment. So,
So that 10,000,
go, yes, sir.
the 10,000 square feet needed, that's for the entire county, and that's 5 years old.
That was what you see just in this chart based on that 5-year-old study. Yes, sir.
But it doesn't.
That's not for the entire
That is
county.
not for the entire county. No.
That's what you meant by it wasn't
Yeah.
inclusive, because now we have an inclusion office.
Those were the ones that were supposed to be included in the fire,
In the courthouse.
okay.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry.
No, that's correct. Other considerations for discussion, I mean, obviously, we're in that discussion today. We do lease a number of facilities. Obviously, we're talking about Taylor Grady. We're talking about Costa eventually. And we have a number of other facilities that are owned by Athens-Clarke County. Essentially, we have 15 leases, annual leases for properties that are owned by Athens-Clarke County. That does include the library, DFAX, Welcome Center, as well as some of our other tenants. All told, those spaces equate to at least 205,000 square feet of leased space. For a comparison, the size of the Doherty Street building and Satula combined are 35,000 square feet. And there are multiple departments between those two buildings. Annual leases, we still maintain responsibility for life cycle costs of those properties because they are ours. We also do preventative and corrective maintenance at most of those locations. Across all leased facilities, over the next 10 years, those 15 leased properties, we anticipate more than $5 million going toward life cycle expenses. That only covers roofs, HVAC, flooring, and paint. That is not inclusive of preventative maintenance and corrective maintenance or any landscape maintenance or any sort of insurance claims through tenant damage, pest control, things like that.
It's a perfect topic for us to have right for a budget, isn't it?
It's coming.
So to recap, we talked about it just now. We are about to begin the renovation of the old fire station number 2. That was approved by ANOPA a couple months ago, and that will provide an additional 2,700 square feet of office and 4,900 square feet of storage space for our existing departments that are in need right now, and that specifically TPW. As part of that same project, we are going to expand a storage room within the facilities and grounds building on Lexington Road. It's an existing room that will now be converted for elections purposes. It's an extra 700 square feet. When I say we're trying to fit people in every space we can, we literally are at this point.
Right.
So other potential solutions to consider. Nothing has been finalized. These are just thoughts out loud. City Hall is also growing in terms of staffing, whether that's the inclusion, PIO, or manager's office. There are some minor interior improvements that we can do to create some divided office space to accommodate up to 5 new positions that are planned or approved already. And we also need to look at some security measures that may change some of the entryways. We have to make a decision on Doherty and Satula with regard to some of the deferred life cycle. We can keep those buildings up and running, but it's going to take some projects and some money to do so.
Gavin, one thing I would add there, I don't know if y'all realized the big HVAC we had parked outside of the courthouse, but even at the courthouse, we're seeing big expenses on keeping things together because it's an old building. So we had to rent equipment for a number of months because we couldn't get a part in. And so we don't want to spend big dollars in that building either until we know exactly what we're going to do with it. So this is a push and pull we're seeing in all these buildings.
One thing we may want to consider. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So from a central services standpoint, this is hypothetical. If we build that beautiful, somebody win the lottery, we build that beautiful judicial center, okay, so I'm thinking long-term down the road and patchworks to the existing courthouse. So that's a plan for Satula and Doherty to potentially go into that space. First question is, will that meet, if hypothetically we get that building, we can put all of our resources into it, our departments into it, that can fit, will that solve 90% to 100% of our space needs, or will that be more?
I think it would, at this point, I'm comfortable saying it would solve at least 75% of our space needs.
You didn't give him that option.
Yeah. So, and with the renovation at the courthouse, are we methodical about its long-term benefit for ACC government and its potential?
Yes, I mean, any renovation of the courthouse is going to take a significant look at the existing systems. I would expect that all systems are upgraded as part of that renovation. Essentially, the only thing we're keeping is the walls and the floors. But whether it's the chiller, whether it's the boiler, whether it's all the venting, all that stuff, roof, all of that's going to have to be redone as part of a renovation before we can move anybody into that building.
Okay. So bigger question, 75%, we got something wrong.
Well, and the other hypothetical is, we don't have the funds to build a judicial center big enough to move everybody out of the courthouse. So we wouldn't even get the full space.
Yeah.
Maybe 25% of the people right there right now would have to stay. And so that's what we don't really know.
So let's keep all these, this is our preview from everybody else on Friday, the thanks for no. So let's get to the part that's gonna help us decide, and we don't have to, we can maybe have a meeting next week to nail down the RFP, but we wanna get through the information here to help us decide what to do on page 11.
Sure. Real quickly to finish this page, we are going to recommend at some point that we do a new study, and it is a comprehensive study for the entire government, not just the courthouse.
And on that note, it will help us identify potentially money we can get when we surplus and sell property, like the ones that are sitting empty.
Yep. And then just to come to grips eventually with the direction and realities of the judicial center and courthouse. Some of those circumstances are out of our control at this point in time, but at some point that will help us go forward is where we know where that direction is going. Also, as Manager Edwards alluded to, the cost of building, there's about 4,600 to 4,800 per floor, and there are 3 floors to that building. One floor is expected to meet the needs of at least 4,000 square feet, which is not readily available elsewhere within Athens-Clarke County. So even one floor for Athens-Clarke County purposes, should that be the committee's recommendation, would go a long way. And that is also something that aligns with our strategic plan, specifically calling out the cost of building in our Athens-Clarke County strategic plan. And that's it for now, but essentially, I don't know if that gave you an answer with regard to Taylor grading, but it's more than just Taylor grading. I don't know that using Taylor grading would be the end all, obviously, to our problems. It would certainly cost a significant amount of money to upgrade Taylor Grady, but at the same time, it is a property that we own currently.
So,
I made up my decision.
well, do we want him to go first or okay, what have you decided?
I like bullet point number 2.
Okay, let's see.
That we take the basement out of the RP. In my train of thought, we have to look down the road as well. So as we get more in tune with our space need, that space will eventually come available. But as the immediate needs of ACC, we need that space. We can't function as a government properly with people bunched up and moving all around. I really hate that TPW is going to Mitchell Bridge. I hate that intersection, but I mean, it's a space that we need. But I just think for right now, it's not being self-assured to benefit of the community. It's just, we got to take care of ourselves, that basement is going to be needed.
Okay, I appreciate that feedback because in my mind, okay, let's say we had a tenant. Let's say we went with number 1, with the first bullet, and we had a tenant that said, $400,000, I'm gonna fix up that basement, we're gonna have office space in there.
Yeah.
That would have somebody else fixing it for us, right? If option 1 was picked.
It could, again, it would be subject to the committee's discretion that they allow that kind of construction project to occur.
So if we went with bullet number 1, then we have to have like a whole nother paragraph about how it's not code and it has to become code. You just can't all of a sudden start. I mean, there's only a small part of the first floor that was offices that's could be functional.
Commissioner, what I would say is I don't anticipate a tenant utilize or renovating the first floor. I think they could utilize it in its kind of current form, find areas for storage or whatever. But I don't see somebody sticking $250,000 into upgrading it on their own, knowing they hold title to the space. And the fact that could delay usage of the property for their other purposes. I don't know if they would hold an event necessarily until that construction was done. I don't know. But that said, even if we went with number 1, I still think there could be value for a tenant. It's just, I don't anticipate them renovating it to that degree.
Well, if we spend the money to fix it up, then maybe later down the road, we can sublease it. When we get the judicial center built, we can sublease it back, we can lease it back to somebody. But it's 4,000 square feet. How many parking spaces is that? There's 25 parking spaces on site. Are you gonna run into an issue of parking? If they're trying to have an event the same day during business hours that we've got?
You could potentially, Commissioner. I think most of the time, if it was used for ACC Gov purposes, it's going to be Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And if you think about the type of departments that could potentially fit there, it's not a large department. You're talking less than 10 people from a department that would reasonably fit in that space.
So, new Commissioner Culpepper, do you have a leaning on the bullets? What would move this forward, or are we ready to move this forward with this decision, or do we need more time?
I'm ready to move forward.
If we go with your bullet,
Yeah.
you're ready.
I'm ready.
I'm fine with going with Commissioner Davenport's bullet because it does open us up to be able to lease it back later on when we have other space. And I don't think that would be a deal breaker of them having that space.
It could turn into as things go, the space is usable after we have used it. I can't imagine that we as a committee could talk others into allocating funds for that basement to be fixed if it's not for our staff.
And-
So, I mean, so that's part of what got us to this point as well, is the ability for us to put money, public money into a public building and then it not being used all publicly, like Linden House,
Yeah.
or all publicly for our public servant to operate staff.
And Commissioner, to your point too, I mean, there's a way for us to basically take consideration of the first floor off the books. We can say to the tenant as part of this RFP, your space is limited to the second and third floor. That's how you have to design your proposal.
Mhm.
Aside from even the funding part of it, which we would still have to get approval for to do any kind of renovation down in the basement, there's the schedule. I mean, realistically, do we anticipate getting floor plans approved and the funds?
I mean, historic,
This is,
yeah.
any project in that basement will be a year off at least,
Mhm.
for Athens-Clarke County purposes even. It's not like we're gonna start construction tomorrow and we have a plan in place already. We don't.
Exactly.
The longer that building sits, not being used, there's more wear and tear on it, without it being inhabited.
So does the second bullet cover that, I mean, you guys put it in here, so that covers what you just sort of described?
Essentially, what it does is it doesn't hold this committee to any sort of commitment to actually renovate that first floor or provide funding. It just basically says it is off limits for the proposal, that the proposal will move forward with the second and third floors, and that is what they are limited to. And even if we don't do anything with that first floor for the next 5 years, it doesn't matter. We made it clear in the proposal that is not for consideration.
Gotcha. And then, of course, if that changes, the dialogue would be made just like I would for a tenant going, hey, listen, we couldn't be doing some work outside. We need to,
Yeah.
or I'll be doing some work.
Maybe we should give them first right of refusal. If we renovate it and we don't need the space anymore, give the existing tenant first right of refusal on that space.
For a proposal, well, we would basically have to put another request for proposal out.
But I think we should give them first right, because they're already in there, I don't know if you can legally do
Yeah, I
that.
was gonna say, Judd, is that, if we were down the road and it was finished and we'd moved out and we're looking, what's the legal way to get a new arrangement down there?
All our leases are for 1 year, right?
They are. So the leases are for 1 year with built-in automatic renewals for a period of up to 5 years. What I would say is that even if after the first year we decide, okay, we're not going to do anything with this, this should be open for consideration by whoever is on the second and third floor. It may be problematic to just automatically give them that option. I think that because, again, this is public space and it wasn't part of the original contract, we would have to put that back out.
But we,
I was trying to think of a way around it, put it in the contract, that we sign the lease to say it.
but we,
Maybe we did it based on the square footage that we were prorating square footage amount, so we, and put in the initial lease to say, they were going to pay that amount. Maybe we can work it out somehow like that. You follow what I'm saying?
right,
In other words, they're understanding that their rent would increase by the amount of square footage added on a prorated basis or something,
yeah, it
We
would
have to give some justification,
I think we would just run into issues, and I mean, I'll obviously defer to the attorney that there could be a way to do it, but I think it gets complicated when all of a sudden you're offering another 4,000 square feet, and it's not open to everyone. So
I agree, it's complicated, that's what I was trying to follow around.
Gotcha. Well, that is, I mean, it's interesting because the last tenant was a 30-year arrangement. So we're kind of, in one term, we're thinking about what's the next 30-year plan, but it might not be. I would think we would want to be strong on the commitment for that 5 because nobody wants to do all this and then have it pulled out from under them. But on bullet number 2, which I'm okay with us moving forward with, because that does reflect some of our previous discussions, which may or may not include limited access to this area by the tenant.
what I think we have to recognize is that there is an internal staircase that goes from the second floor down to the basement. And that whether for fire emergency purposes or just getting things in and out through the corridor hallway from the main level up to there, we will work with the tenant to give them access to it. It's not like it's gonna be closed off completely,
Mhm.
but essentially, they don't have permission to use the rooms for storage. They don't have permission to set up break rooms downstairs. They get to use it to walk through and get up the stairs.
It's like an easement. We're
Correct.
basically giving them an interior easement with it. And then that can be, if that needs to be expanded in that explanation, I think the people who have, well, if the same people do the walkthrough that'll be with this one, if there's a new person, then they'll know, which is why we have the mandatory walkthrough,
Yeah.
to be clear on that.
Yeah.
Well, committee, are you guys ready for this to move out of our
Move,
discussion and move for more discussion, like we move it? My thought was that we were doing this to move to the full mayor and commission to approve. No, we do the internal
This is
RFP.
the posting. of
That's
it,
right.
To move forward with posting the RFP.
Exactly, and then once everything's said and done, the mayor and commission do have, the full commission has to approve what decision
That's right.
we make.
I
So
motion to approve to release the RFP with additions.
with bullet number 2 on page 11,
You, did you mention expansion of the addition of added verbiage for, which may or may not include limited access to the area?
We can do that. We can clarify the language in there if you'd like.
easement, access,
I don't know if it'll be a
Okay.
formal easement, but just we'll clarify it, yeah.
clarify that. I mean, I guess if there was an emergency need for the bathroom downstairs, Beth, would they be able to use that if something was?
There's a way for us to basically lock and close every door off the hallway with the exception of access to the stair going up and the door going.
I see. Okay, so that's the space.
Yeah.
And that would be potentially people moving things in and out instead of using the handicap lift.
Correct.
Okay. That clarifies it for me. Would you like
With
to?
the,
Go ahead.
with the change without using the first floor, we're obviously gonna update the square footage of the building.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Would you like to second the motion that Patrick has made?
Yes, I'll second.
All right, all in favor of the motion on the floor, say aye. All right, it's unanimous. Thank you, staff. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your hard work.
The preliminary information on Friday's new agenda item for the retreat, that's gonna be important stuff for us to be talking about, so I'm glad we were. And I hope some of that comes through the property committee. Okay, on that note, I'm looking for one more motion.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor to adjourn?
Aye.
Aye, it is so.
Thank y'all.
Good news, everybody.
All right, thanks, Cynthia. I'm just signing.